So, welcome to the Workshop Therapy Podcast. I'm Andrew, and today I am joined by the marvelous Mike Garado. Why don't you introduce yourself, Mike? Say hi.
Hey, I'm Mike Garado. My Instagram handle is Garado Woodworks. I guess about my woodworking stuff, I kind of do a lot of everything. I work professionally as a picture frame maker for close to 10 years. What I make privately is mostly craftier type items, cutting boards, boxes. I do a lot of carving these days. Yeah, a little bit.
Anyway, you make a lot of those little figurines and stuff that I don't carve very much. My carving's always, like, what are you making? I'm making a stick, and it's going to be a littler stick when it's done.
Yeah, I got into the carving really heavily because I'm a toddler and I can't make a lot of noise after she goes to bed. So it's my way of getting my woodworking fix in when I can. So I spent the last couple of years really honing that skill, but it's been a fun little spiral for sure.
That is one of the advantages of having a standalone shop, and I'm far enough away from my neighbors that my planer can be screaming at 1 o'clock in the morning and nobody will hear.
Oh man, I'm jealous of that. I am on top of every one of my neighbors. I'm in New York City, so I can't make a move without someone hearing it, seeing it. It's annoying.
Well, that's one of the nice things about living in the middle of nowhere. You can kind of make the noise and nobody complains. And like my neighbor, he's a body man, like does body work on cars and stuff like that. And he has this bloody turbine air vent thing for his spray booth. Makes so much friggin' noise. But because we're, relatively rural and 100 yards apart, it's barely noticeable except for when I'm in my shop and then I really hear it screaming.
Yeah, no, I have to really be cautious about time and when I'm doing some of my, if I have to plane something or table saw, I'm very cautious about when I'm doing it, mostly for my neighbors. I don't want to be a bother.
So how big's your shop?
I have a 2-car garage where I only get to really utilize one half. So the other half houses a car. So if I need the space, we can move the car and I'll kind of spread out across the shop. But it's mostly just this one little side over here. I do have a outdoor space that I can drag things out and utilize, but it gets hot in the summer.
Yeah, that's I was out in my shop today and I looked at the thermometer and it was 32 degrees in it and Celsius. So that's like 98, I think, around the 100-degree mark. Anyway, it was pretty brutal.
It's not fun at all. I was doing work on Saturday out back and it was 93 degrees Fahrenheit. I was just cooking out there. It was miserable, but I had a couple things that I needed to get done. So it's the only time I could do it.
So how much time do you get in the shop on an average week? I mean, if you got a toddler, you have next to no time.
These days is very minimal. I'm lucky if I can get 4 hours, 5 hours a week at this point. Mostly just because even the carving, I've been too tired or just not really into it, in the garage in summertime. So it's kind of miserable sitting in here in 90-degree weather and, trying to do something quietly. So I really only do some stuff when someone commissions me or if I'm just really into it at this point.
Your regular day job type stuff, you work like 9 to 5, or is that when you're working, you work till the job's done sort of thing?
No, it's a 9 to 5. Like I mentioned before, I was in the framing world. I'm not anymore. COVID, ruined that. So I had to recalibrate and get a new job. I'm in sales and I sell acrylic and plastic materials, building materials mostly, wholesale company. So it's a 9 to 5. It's definitely a lot better, I'd say, mentally and physically. After working in a shop for so long, I would just come home beat up. My body was hurting. I was always getting cut or hurt or injured in some way. It was definitely taking a toll for sure. So I feel much happier now that I have like an office job where I could sit all day and, not abuse my body.
So were you doing the woodworking and making stuff when you were building frames too, or is that kind of to maintain the creativity?
Yeah, I was doing the woodworking on the side as well, but it was stuff that I wanted to actually make. the frames was just a job. You know, you have to make a few thousand frames. You know, you're kind of sick of them. They get boring and repetitive. So I just wanted to make a box, or, you know, when I got my lathe, I was really gung ho about making bowls and lidded boxes and pens and all sorts of things. So yeah, it was just a way to keep me occupied and, you know, keep me happy.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of like we were talking before the show started there. We talked about there seems to be a lot of people that do the making thing in all of its different forms, just for that mental health kind of aspect of things, you know, keep you happy, keep you from getting depressed, that type of thing. Is that kind of what it is for you now too? Is just you get out, get the carving, just kind of give you a little bit of release as you go through your day?
Yeah, definitely. You know, over the years, I've suffered from anxiety issues, and the woodworking was another outlet to distract me from whatever was bothering me in that at that time. It kept my hands occupied, it kept my mind occupied. So it was it's kind of great to have something that you can physically do and have an end result as well. You know, so not only was my mind occupied and my body occupied, I guess, in the moment, I could have a finished product that I can look at and admire and be proud of, I guess. You know, something constructive and positive came out of it. And, you know, some stuff ends up looking terrible. If you're in a bad mood or you're feeling anxious, you're not really doing a great job. And some stuff, you know, some of my best things have come out of just being overly anxious and working on, you know, a piece. The downside is when you look at that piece, you remember what you were going through in that moment, which isn't always fun, but
give you a little bit of PTSD type of thing when you look at your stuff. So what do you do then when you're feeling anxious and you're working on something? Do you specifically work on it because you're anxious, or like you said, some of them when your best ones have come out when you're feeling really anxious, and so is it like I'm focusing down on this so I can ignore those voices or whatever it is that's...
Yeah, so it's weird because initially, if I am in that kind of anxious mode and I'm working on something, it starts off where I'm just trying to get past those anxious feelings. You're really only kind of thinking about that and not about what you're working on. And then as you're focusing and your mind kind of shifts from that anxious mode to what you're doing, and that creative kind of mode kicks in, you kind of lose yourself in the moment. You're just kind of, you know, before you realize 20 minutes, 30 minutes goes in and you're just really into this piece you're working on. It kind of just helps switch modes, I guess.
So it's like a mindfulness thing then. So you just kind of being mindful of the moment. Was it Keith Blackthorn Concepts there when he the first episode, he talked about the reel that all the voices and then the person paints or does whatever and the voices all disappear. Like that.
The minute they do, yeah, exactly. It's very similar to that. I've seen that reel too a bunch of times, and it does make a lot of sense. You know, everything just kind of washes out, and you're focused on what you're doing. I wouldn't say entirely everything goes away. There's moments, you know, you're working on something and your anxious thought kicks back in, and you'll think about that for a few minutes, and then you'll end up switching back and forth. And
see, I'm not a tremendously anxious person. Like, I'm relatively laid back. My wife has got some pretty high anxiety, but when I'm in the shop, I tend to be slightly more anxious than when I'm outside of the shop, just because I'm not afraid of any of my tools, but I'm hyper focused on them, right? Because I have a sibling, he's missing fingers and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's my past shop experience or working experience where I was able to kind of move past some of those anxious feelings, you know, because when you're in a shop 8-9 hours a day working, it's hard to be focused 100% on what you're doing. You know, you're thinking about dinner, you're thinking about other life stressors, whatever's going on at the time. I'm very calm working with all the machinery. There's some things when I'm like, okay, I really just need to make sure I'm focused. Especially I've seen some pretty horrific accidents in, you know, my past work experience. And I don't want that to happen to me at all. So, you know, I kind of know when to be extra careful and when I can kind of zone out, I guess.
Yeah. Truth be told, the only, well, there's two tools that freak me out. Well, not freak me out. There's two tools that I'm treat with extreme respect, and one of them is a router.
Yeah, me too.
That's one of those ones where I'm like, is there another way to do this? Then I'm going to do that, and I'm going to avoid the router. And the other one is a side grinder, like an angle grinder.
Okay.
And it's because that one I have a legit reason for, because when I was like 5-6 years old, I was out working in the shop with my brother. I fell and I landed on the angle grinder and I hit the trigger and hit the disc with my elbow, and it took a big chunk out of my arm.
Ouch.
Yeah. So the angle grinders, that's one where I'm not afraid of using them, but when I'm using them, I'm holding on for dear life to make sure I don't lose control.
I agree with you with the router. There was another tool in the shop. I don't have one of these in my own shop, but it was the Shaper, which is basically a giant size router. The bad experience I had when I first started there, I didn't know how to use the machine. And there was a guy there who claimed to know how to use the machine. He was reassured me, don't worry, I know what I'm doing. And ultimately he put the steel blade in and never locked it down.
Ooh.
And he turned the machine on and it shot out like a missile. Thankfully, no one was hurt. But every time I turn that machine on, I always, duck down a little bit.
Well, it's the same. I know a guy, that's basically what happened to him. The cutter head came apart, like it broke as it was spinning up, shot a chunk into his abdomen, messed him up pretty bad. And so, yeah, Shapers, they're scary, but I don't have one, so I'm not worried about it.
Yeah,
but that's one thing when I'm using a router, I'll kind of make sure that I'm out of the line of fire just in case, for the same kind of paranoia.
Yeah, no, some scary stuff for sure.
But I always approach it though as you could trip and fall and die hitting your head on the sidewalk on the way home. So you can't avoid all risk. So why?
I don't know if anyone else thinks of this, but it happens to me all the time when I'm actually working with a tool and the saw blade is spinning. I don't know why my mind always goes to it, but I think, what would happen if my hand just went into the blade? As horrific as it sounds, any machine I'm working on, that thought always pops into my head. The desire to touch it, but knowing you shouldn't touch it.
I'll admit that I have those thoughts every once in a while where you're like, yeah, the thoughts in the back of your head. I wonder what would happen if I did that. And then the smarter part of the back of your head goes, that's a really bad idea to experiment.
I just don't know why that's a thing. Someone else told me they have those kind of thoughts as well.
Everybody is secretly like a masochist or something like that, I suppose.
I guess. I mean, I don't know about you, but I've been hurt before. I had a kickback that cracked the rib. So I know the certain painful things that can happen. So I don't know why I think of that stuff, but it does happen.
Yeah, I've never had any kickback that hit me. I had a couple where I wasn't paying attention and dropped something on the running blade and it, flipped it back or something like that, but nothing that's ever hit me.
I don't know if this is off topic or not, but you mentioned your wife had anxiety issues. I got the book that she wrote.
Oh yeah, her Scaredy Cat. Yeah.
The Scaredy Cat. And I was wondering, I was reading the book and I was like, this is someone who's been through some stuff for sure. And I was just kind of curious, like, where that came from. And
I've mentioned this on every podcast so far. I'm currently waiting for disability, right, for my hand, because I can't do work anymore, and so there's two reasons that I'm going down the clinical psychology route, and one of them is because my son also has some pretty significant anxiety issues. There is some research that it's genetic, or there's genetic components to it. I blame my wife, but yeah, the book is actually, she blames me for all the other problems. So she's got one problem she can take responsibility for. Anyway, so the book is actually kind of our son and his, about him and, dealing with anxiety and stuff. But yeah, she definitely has anxiety. She's actually working on another one because my daughter, the middle child, she was jealous that this is very, very clearly about my brother. So what about me? What are you going to write about me? And so she's working on another book called The Very Angry Unicorn.
Oh, cool.
And so we'll see how
she get that one too.
I think anxiety is one of those things where people don't realize it's as debilitating as it can be. Like I said, I'm a pretty laid back person, so it's, for me, anxiety is like, well, just get over it, whatever, move on with life. What's the worst that can happen? And but for my wife, it becomes very debilitating, and my son, it becomes very debilitating. And so it's helped me realize that people need some sort of outlet to distract them, because otherwise you get stuck into this realm of self-feeding fear, I guess.
Yeah. So I mean, I can relate entirely to them. I've dealt with the anxiety issues for, I want to say, about 20 years now, since I was a teenager. It's altered my life entirely. I've had a lot of ups and downs from it, and it's very debilitating. It's, I mentioned earlier I have agoraphobic issues. For me, that stuff is, the agoraphobia is kind of classed in a few different realms. There's the one where, you're in a crowded place and you can't just be within that environment. I kind of have it where traveling and distance is an issue for me. If I kind of get a little bit too far from my comfort zone, my anxiety really kicks in, and it kind of prevents me from wanting to go further out. If that makes sense.
So it's like the farther you are from your safe space sort of thing.
Yeah.
So next time I drive to the Arctic Ocean, you don't want to come with us then?
No, probably not. Although it looks like fun.
It was pretty fun, for the most part. Going through all the tires was a bit annoying, but
I saw you blew like 5 tires.
4. It was more than I wanted to. That's for sure.
So how was that? With the traveling with a few people in your house with anxiety issues?
Actually, it was better than being at home, to be truthful.
Wow.
And that's where anxiety is a weird thing. Like, I would have thought that my son, at the very least, would have been, a lot more. And before we left, he was pretty on edge about going like, oh, what if, like, what if we have a flat tire? Well, we'll change a flat tire, right? What if this happens? Well, then we'll deal with this. Or what if this? And well, we'll deal with it. And I actually think that was beneficial, is getting out and dealing with the problems, right? And understanding that, yeah, bad things can happen, but 99.9% of the time you can deal with it and move on. And I think that helped, because he's actually been better since we've been home.
Oh, great. But glad to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, not that he's magically cured or anything like that, but I remember talking with you a little while on the old Instagram there. Don't you have a place up in the Catskills or something like that your family has?
Yeah, we do. It's up in the Catskills. I haven't been up there lately, but it's one of my favorite places. I often think about picking up and moving up there and living up there.
How does the agoraphobia thing work into that? Does it ramp up until you get about halfway there, and then you realize you're getting close, and then it ramps back down, or when you're going there, you're going from one good place to another good place, so it doesn't bother you as much?
You know what? It's so unpredictable and unreliable. Like, I wouldn't even be able to say there's any rhyme or reason to it. It can happen going to work, or it can happen running to the store, or it can happen on a longer trip. I'm sure there's things that do trigger it that I'm either unaware of, or things that I may not consider to be a big deal, and they actually are. Yeah, it's very unpredictable. So it makes things difficult. Social life, was a little bit hard. You make plans with someone, and then, hey, all of a sudden you're not feeling well and you can't go, or, I've never been good about telling anybody about it. So I think that confused a lot of people, or made me seem kind of standoffish or flaky. Bring Mike along, and then he doesn't show up. So it's been, it's had its ups and downs.
So is there any strategies that you've learned to deal with it at all, or?
They have the go-to methods. If you're having some sort of anxiety attack, or you're feeling anxious, the breathing methods.
Like a box breathing sort of thing. Breathe in for 4, out for 4, hold for 3.
Yeah, or focus on red-colored objects. Just to kind of change your thought, I guess, a way of distracting it. I think over the years, those can be effective. I don't think they are entirely helpful. I think it's a way of avoiding what's actually happening. And I think actually trying to sit with it, like if you are not feeling well in that moment, to kind of sit there and try to ride it out and kind of analyze, hey, I'm not feeling well. Okay, why am I not feeling well? What's making me anxious? What's causing me to feel this way or think this way? And try to like rework your way out of it that way. I think that's probably the better strategy. But it's hard in the moment. If you're panicking and you're freaking out, your mindset is completely gone. You're not thinking rationally. Your idea is to just let me get out of this bad situation. And I think by doing that, you're doing a disservice to yourself and kind of feeding into that fire and allowing it to happen again.
Well, I was just thinking, a bunch of research that I've run across here talks about doing exactly what you're talking about. Sit there and be comfortable with it for a little bit, or uncomfortable with it, and work through it and figure out why it's doing that. Because basically what the anxiety thing is it's that innate fight or flight response that everybody has, which is a good thing. It's not that anxiety about strange situations or danger is a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. When it becomes debilitating or overbearing, then it becomes a problem. But that's where a lot of current research is going. Be present with those feelings and work through them and figure out what's causing them. Because if you don't do that, if you're doing, like you said, the avoid and look at the red color or get yourself out of the situation, what you're doing is you're actually training your brain to reinforce that fight or flight response. Because I'm anxious, I run away, now the anxiety is gone, therefore that was the correct response, right? And then when you get into that situation again, the anxiety spikes, and because that was the safe response last time, that's the response this time. And if you don't do it, that just bumps up the anxiety a little bit more until you do the safe thing. And so going through it and figuring out the what's triggering this is the right way to go about it according to current research anyway.
And more often than not, when you actually do run away from that situation, think of something else to distract yourself, you don't feel good about you feel good in the moment because you escaped that panic state, but you don't feel good about yourself because you feel like you ran away, or you feel like you weren't strong enough to actually overcome the issue. So it's a weird feeling for sure.
The last podcast interview I did, it's not out yet, so you wouldn't have heard it, but we talked a little bit about PTSD. One of the things that PTSD kind of ties into this with is, I read a paper that was kind of equating PTSD to a broken story. So you tell yourself a story, and then you get to this traumatic event, and then the story stops, so it's never been completed, and so you keep coming back to this moment where trauma happened, and you never get past the story. And so one of the therapies you can do is a story writing type of thing where you complete the story, and that helps deal with it. And I think like anxiety, probably kind of a similar thing, is it's kind of triggering the same fight or flight response stuff in your head. And so you probably feel bad about running away because you didn't complete the story. Because obviously you had a goal to, go out party with your friends or go to the grocery store and grab groceries or whatever it is, but you couldn't complete that thing. And that's kind of what, you couldn't complete the story arc, as it were.
Yeah, that makes sense. Interesting way to think of it. I've also heard that people with severe anxiety, severe panic attacks, and over the years of having them, your form of PTSD is the panic attack. It's not like you had a traumatic experience per se. Like, it's not like you were mugged or, something, car crash or something severe happened to you, but just because you've had so many of these panic attacks or these bad moments that they're kind of lumped into one big giant traumatic experience for you.
Well, yeah,
I think a lot of people end up with post-traumatic stress disorder based on the anxiety.
Well, and that's where you get that self-feeding cycle, right? Like, you have the fear response, then you run away, and that reinforces it for the next time, and eventually it just builds and builds and builds and builds until it is a major issue. Instead of just I'm feeling uncomfortable, it becomes completely debilitating. Or you get the beginnings of the anxiety, like I'm slightly uncomfortable, oh no, I'm having anxiety, and then it spikes and boom, now you're back in that cycle.
Yeah, it's very easy to fall into those negative thoughts and run away with them. It's very hard to think positive, especially in a moment when you're not feeling well. You'll just run with those negative, thoughts and anxiety, and it just overwhelms you at that point.
So do you feel like that's kind of tied to the agoraphobia thing too?
Yeah, I would say so. I think for me, what ended up happening was I would get anxiety attacks away from home, whether they be at school or at work, or if I was out with friends or whatever I was doing, I would have these intense panic attacks. And, if you're 16, 17, you don't know what's going on. You think you're not feeling well. So you leave, you go home, So I think in a way I ended up training my brain to like, okay, if you go here, this will happen. Or if you go there, that will happen, and you just kind of fall into that routine of it. And so ultimately, anytime you go somewhere, you're going to have one because you're thinking you're going to have one. So you're just feeding into it.
So how, tying it kind of back to the shop type of stuff, when did you first start doing like the carving and the making and the working in the shop type of stuff as a self-therapy thing, or did you consciously do that?
I mean, I was always kind of drawn to it. Yeah, I've always kind of done something by hand. I always like to make things. I think it was more of just something I love to do, and I ended up using it as a way to help with the anxiety issues.
Well, that makes sense.
I do other creative things too. I draw. I'm really into card magic. Also.
Are you?
I don't show any of that on my Instagram or anything, but occasionally you'll catch a glimpse of some cards or a card box or poker chips or something like that. But yeah, I mean, for many years I would play with deck cards. That was a big anxiety reliever for me as well. Just kept something to keep my hands occupied. Deck of cards, fiddling around with them, doing tricks.
So it's kind of like that focusing on something that requires attention is helpful for you, eh?
Yeah, I guess it was my day and age is fidget spinner.
Yeah.
I know that was a big thing not so long ago. And it was something that I could get anywhere. If I was out and about and I wasn't feeling good, I could run to the store and just, hey, let me get a pack of cards and have something to play with and just keep me busy.
Well, that's probably a cheaper habit than a shop, eh? A couple bucks for a pack of cards versus a table saw.
That and a pack of cigarettes a little cheaper.
I had the option to do cocaine or have a shop, and I decided to do the more expensive one and get a shop.
I said that saying, you want to be a millionaire woodworking, start out with $2 million. Yeah, It was cliche sayings.
Thanks for sharing how you deal with anxiety and stuff and how shop helps you.
Hope it can help somebody.
Well, that's the goal. We'll see. I think that's one of the most interesting things for me about the maker community here, though, is the number of people who deal with mental health things, and their shop is their therapy, and their willingness to share that with other people. Like when I first floated the idea of doing this podcast, I got more responses to that one story than I think I've ever got, and probably as many responses to that one Instagram story as I get in your average. Like
I said, there's tons of people that I see in the maker community suffering depression, anxiety, or other form of mental health issues.
I think it's important, not even for people who don't suffer from something more debilitating, is just I think taking some time to be creative is just beneficial for your mental health in general. Because it gives you that time to focus on something, right? Where you can't be carving or running a table saw and or whatever you're doing. You can't be doing those things and fiddling on your phone and thinking about whatever nonsense that is triggering problems or whatever, right? And so
yeah,
you go down like the mindfulness research, as much as there's like the stigma of the people who are got their going on, whatever, what a bunch of weirdos type of thing. There is really a lot of benefit to having something that you focus on that's separate from everything else. And I think that's where creativity, like carving or drawing, things like that are really beneficial.
It's a nice escape from reality. You don't have to. When I'm in my shop, I'm not always anxious in my shop, but when I am in my shop, everything disappears. I don't think about work. I don't think about family stuff. I I'm listening to whatever music I'm listening to, and I'm focused on the project, and I'm just calm and, peaceful until I mess something up and I throw it across the shop and get it.
I can tell you that I would have severe anxiety if I lived in New York City. That would just...
It is an intense place. I grew up here too. So, it's a lot. There's a million people around you. It's noisy all the time. It's just getting crazy.
You and I grew up almost completely opposite then, because when I was younger, before we moved closer to town, our driveway alone was 6 miles long.
Yes.
It was a 15-minute drive from our house to where the school bus would pick me up, and the school bus ride was an hour and a half to town to get to go to school. I mean, we'd stop and pick other kids up, so it wasn't a straight drive, right? But hour and a half, yeah. And the town that my school was in, the grad class was 2 people.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's nuts, man.
And then we moved closer to town, so we were only 17 miles out of town when we moved. We had neighbors within a mile and a half. It was really, really crowded.
My closest neighbors attached to my house. We attached houses. 2 feet away is the next door.
Yeah. When after I graduated high school, I ended up in Los Angeles for a couple of years, and that was some severe culture shock for me. And I'd imagine that New York would be even worse.
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. A lot of people ask me that aren't from here what it's like, and I'm just like, it's both the greatest place and the worst place you can be at the same time. You meet some of the best people, some of the worst people, and everything in between. It's definitely interesting when I come across people like you, come from these rural backgrounds, and 3 people in your class, or whatever.
Although the grad class of 2, 1 year, it made national headlines. And this has always kind of irritated me because it's the media, right? The headline was 50% of the grad class commit suicide.
Wow.
When you read that headline, you're like, oh my goodness. And then
it's like
reality,
a mass cult suicide.
Yeah, but in reality, it's not to negate the tragedy. It's a tragedy, right? Like,
Sadness.
But it's 1 person out of 2.
Yeah, that's really bad phrasing.
Well, it made national headlines specifically because of that phrasing. Like this slow news day. Let's anyway, ridiculous.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Well, we should probably wrap this up before we go off on some weird tangent. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate you being. Let's see, your guest number 4, I guess. So you're in the founding guests, and
oh, great! I'm glad to be a part of it. And thank you. I appreciate you allowing me to come on here.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your time with me and sharing some of the things that you go through and the way you deal with it. And hopefully it'll be helpful for everybody. So as kind of a sign off, if there's something that Mike has shared with you that you feel is beneficial or helpful to you or to somebody you know, share it, because that'll reinforce it in your head and it'll help that person too. So thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us, Mike. Remember to check out Mike at Garado Woodworks on Instagram. Are you in any of the other social medias?
Not really. Facebook.
Well, thanks for coming on, and we'll sign off. Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
I just want to say thank you to the founding members of the Workshop Therapy Patreon family. Eric of Overall Makerworks, Keith Drennan of Blackthorn Concepts, Brad of Brad's Customs, Matthew Serio from Arciano Serio, and the Grant Alexander. If you want to join on Patreon to support the show or just say thank you, I'd appreciate it.